Hello and welcome to step 4 of your individual development project for BMGT 640 organizational behavior. We are going to complete the final steps in your leader network diagnostic through this video. Feel free to press pause as you need to and come back to the video as you're completing steps in the leader network diagnostic. So we're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of effective networks. And what research has shown is that effective networks really balance bonding ties and bridging ties. What do we mean by this? Bonding ties are a measure of the interconnectedness between the members of your network. And they also are a measure of how deep, how close, how trust-filled the ties are between the people in your network. Let's look at an example. We have Jane and Joseph who have networks of similar size, but Jane's network on the left has many more bonding ties than Joseph's more sparse network on the right. You can see that the people within Jane's network are highly interconnected. There are many connections between them. These types of bonding ties often result in some major benefits. Interconnections among the people in your network create increased channels for communication, which often leads to increased solidarity, stronger reciprocity norms. Reciprocity means the desire to return a favor, basically. Greater trust between network members, sanctions against self-serving behavior, so people are less likely to do shady things, and enhanced knowledge transfer, better sharing of tacit information. And tacit information is the stuff that's harder to come by. It's the tricks of the trade, it's the know-how, the stuff that's not written down. And finally, often relates to greater commitment to each other between the members of the network. So now we're going to have you complete a thought exercise. The thought exercise is in Moodle under the next step of the Leader Network Diagnostic Individual Development Project first deliverable. So after you read through these questions, you can pause the video and go back to Moodle to complete the thought exercise. So take a look at your network diagnostic, the steps 1 through 5 that you've already completed. Is your network interconnected or sparse? And that you can tell by looking at step 3, the openness step. And so the openness score will tell you the higher the score, the more open or sparse your network is. The lower the score, the more interconnected your network is. What are the main factors that are contributing to how interconnected or sparse your network is? And are there examples where a more interconnected network would have been beneficial for you? Another aspect of bonding ties is deep, close, trust-filled relationships. So strong, trust-filled relationships with people help you develop your skills. These folks may know the organization really well and can steer you in the right direction, or they might be able to provide helpful and constructive feedback that would aid in your development. Often, they also enable you to borrow their status in the organization. They can vouch for you, they can talk about the good work that you're doing, and they can champion your ideas with those at higher levels. So what makes a deep relationship? Often the difference between weak ties and strong ties is a matter of reciprocity, trust, and frequency of contact. So reciprocity means that the relationship is mutually beneficial and there's a bunch of give or take between the two people in the relationship. On the other hand, low reciprocity indicates that perhaps this is a one-way relationship and one person perhaps is doing all the giving and the other person is doing all the taking. A trust-filled relationship often is exemplified by strong commitment between the two parties and an expectation of responsiveness. They know that if they email you with a question, they can expect a quick response. And then a certain amount of self-disclosure. You open yourself up to the person and let them know a little bit about you. And then finally, not always, but often, strong ties are more frequent interaction. So you're more likely to feel a really close relationship with somebody with whom you interact with on a regular basis. We're moving on to the next thought exercise now. Feel free to press pause on the video so that you can complete the questions in Moodle. But I want you to think about how many deep, trust-filled relationships you have with people who can maybe give you access to information you wouldn't get to otherwise, people who can help you develop your skills, and people who can vouch for you, perhaps with the higher ups in your organization or your career path. And then I also want you to think about perhaps what are some of the barriers to forming those types of relationships. Effective networks also balance bridging ties. So bridging ties are the connections that bridge otherwise unconnected people. And often there are connections that also cross organizational boundaries. So we've got another example here of an open bridging network and a more closed bonding network. You can see that Joseph and Jane have similar numbers of people, but Joseph has a network that is much more interconnected, and Jane has a network that is much more open. So the benefits that Jane enjoys are pretty clear to see. She has connections with people who are different kinds of people. If you consider that the blue, green, magenta, and orange might indicate different areas of expertise, for instance, then Jane has access to lots of different kinds of expertise. Whereas Joseph, in part because his network is highly interconnected, but also in part because he's mostly connected to green folks, does not have access to the same level of different kinds of expertise that Jane has. Bridging ties often result in some pretty good benefits. First, individuals that have ties that bridge across boundaries often benefit from greater access to outside resources, faster access to vital information, and access to diverse ideas and viewpoints, which can result in more creative solutions and better leverage. They might have the leverage within the organization to implement their creative solutions. So when you're thinking about networks that cross boundaries, we've had you look at several different kinds of boundaries. Vertical boundaries, which go across levels in the hierarchy. Horizontal boundaries, really across areas of expertise. Stakeholder boundaries outside your organization. Demographic boundaries, we just looked at gender, but of course there's many other different kinds of groups that your network could cross. And geographic boundaries outside your region. So the idea is that individuals whose network cross these kinds of boundaries have access to diverse knowledge and resources that really help them generate more effective solutions. Our next thought exercise asks you to consider what kinds of boundaries your network crosses, and perhaps what boundary crossing would enable you to be more effective. And finally, how easy do you find it to cross boundaries when forming ties, and what are the stumbling blocks that you've experienced? Feel free to press pause on the video so you can complete this thought exercise in your Moodle lesson. So to summarize, in your network diagnostic, we've asked you to think about how much your current network matches up with what effective networks look like. How many bonding ties do you have? How deep are your relationships? And how many bridging ties do you have? How diverse are your contacts? We ask you to consider the following. Why does your network have the structure it has? In what ways is your network well suited to accomplish any goals that you have? And in what ways is perhaps your network falling short? Briefly think about 3 things you'd like to change about your current network that might help you be more effective. And we'll ask you to further develop these ideas for improving your network in deliverable number 2, which is due later this semester. There are a number of different strategies that you can use to develop and craft your network. Building strategies include ways to add new members to your network. And then maintaining strategies are ways that you can deepen and organize and manage your relationships. Whereas leveraging strategies are ways to go about actually using your networks to gain benefit. And then finally, transition strategies are really the strategies where you realize that perhaps a network contact is not as beneficial as they used to be, and it's time to transition out of that relationship. So as you go forward, you identified 3 changes you'd like to make to your network. Deliverable number 2 will ask you to expand upon those changes. And then deliverable number 3 is going to ask you to identify networking strategies you can use to make those changes. You will use materials outside your course materials. You'll do some outside research to come up with some strategies that make sense to you. And you will explore those possibilities further in deliverable number 3, which is due later in the semester. Next steps, submit your completed Leader Network Diagnostic as a PDF in the Moodle lesson. And then your final step will be to complete the post-training survey. Once you do that, you will have completed the assignment.